is Jessie Turner. As mentioned, I'm the director for the OA Alliance and will be facilitating today's virtual workshop. I'm especially delighted to be co-hosting today's event with the Under 2 MOU Coalition, and we are grateful to have so many people joining us from around the world today. And while I won't give an exhaustive list of attendees, I will quickly note that we have local government representation from the following locations today. So we have local government representation within the US states of Washington, California, Hawaii, Alaska, Florida, South Carolina, Maine, New York. We have local governments joining us from the provinces of British Columbia and Quebec, and local governments joining us within Mexico, New Zealand, Japan, Chile, and Argentina. And of course, as we move through this year, addressing multiple crises brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, we here at the Alliance hope that you all and your loved ones and your communities are doing well, and all the more grateful for your time and focus on this topic today. So we have a great line of presentations, and I want to get to them. However, for those of you who are new to the OA Alliance, as members or partners, I'll begin with a very brief overview of our work before introducing today's agenda. And let's see here, make sure I'm admitting folks as we go. Great. So we were created in 2016 by the 3 state governments of California, Oregon, Washington, and the province of British Columbia in Canada in direct response to some of the first ever observed impacts of ocean acidification on oyster hatchery production across the North American West Coast. And it was really because of these early impacts that shellfish growers, tribal governments, and state government got activated early along the West Coast of North America and really laid the foundation for the Alliance to seek out engagement on this issue from other governments around the world. And today, the Alliance, we are working together to elevate urgency and ambition for climate action, to integrate ocean into climate commitments, and to translate knowledge into policy action by a set of different types of governments all over the world. And since our launch, the Alliance has grown to about 100 members, and we are still growing. As you can see, we have a strong mix of government members, along with many dedicated affiliate partners like NGOs, industry leaders, and local academia. And of course, today's webinar will focus on local government strategies expressly. However, I want to mention that we have a very active membership of tribal and First Nation governments who are leading a lot of work here on the North American West Coast. And while I didn't include a tribal government representative in today's agenda because it's largely focused on municipalities, from different presentations, and we'll have more focus on tribal nations and tribal government work in the future. Oh boy. Oh, sorry all for my tech issues. I'm learning how to host more folks on Zoom, which is great. All right. So what are we asking our members to do? So the Alliance is calling for the creation of what we call these OA action plans, which are meant to describe real tangible actions that government or affiliate members will take or are taking to better understand and respond to the threat of ocean acidification. And specifically for us, these categories include reducing carbon dioxide emissions, the #1 cause of ocean acidification, advancing scientific understanding, reducing local pollutions that exacerbate OA, protecting the environment and coastal communities from impacts now and into the future, expanding public awareness and sustaining this international and multi-governmental focus and support. And it is likely that many of you on this call are leading programs or departments that already do some of this work. And ideally, we want to help partners see how existing efforts could be leveraged or expanded to incorporate a more sustained focus on OA and climate ocean change. And we also want to show how local actions to reduce exacerbating stressors can increase the resilience of marine species and ecosystems that are most at risk, and will also yield multiple co-beneficial outcomes. And so today you're going to hear a lot of different strategies for how, and importantly, why local governments are furthering OA-related actions. And another big goal of the Alliance is to elevate OA and ocean change across international and domestic climate frameworks. And indeed, many local and regional governments are striving to create robust climate action plans and resilience building strategies. And we want to make sure that OA and climate ocean change is an integral part of that work. So for some local governments, they've decided to include an OA focus either as a reason for increasing ambition, as a critical part of assessing social and economic vulnerabilities, possibly as projects that are eligible for climate resilience funding or various investments, or largely as part of a suite of actions that they are helping to meet existing goals and targets that you all have made across frameworks like the Under 2 MOU, UN Sustainable Development Goals, or other climate commitments that you might already be part of. So as mentioned, we have a great lineup today of speakers. We'll begin with Dr. Sarah Cooley and Mr. Sean Bothell giving us a short primer on what is OA, what is coastal acidification, and what are the types of actions that local governments can take. And from there, we'll hear a short list of case studies from really innovative partners who are deploying some of these strategies. So we'll hear from the City of Vancouver in British Columbia, the Port of Seattle, the Waikato Regional Council in New Zealand, as well as Tampa Bay Estuary Program in Florida. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pull up Dr. Sarah Cooley, Senior Scientist from Ocean Conservancy's presentation here. And if you'll just give me one moment. And Sarah, can you hear me okay?
I can, Jesse. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you for all the technical difficulties. Great. All right. Go ahead, Sarah. Appreciate your patience.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm really impressed at the turnout today. Thanks for making us part of your afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you may be located. Thanks, Jesse, for inviting me to talk to the group. Today, I'll tell you a little bit about what is ocean acidification and what is coastal acidification. Next slide, please, Jesse. Okay. As you might guess, I'm a scientist, and so I think quite a lot about ocean and coastal acidification. And so today I'll tell you a little bit about both, and I'll talk a little bit about how local contributions can affect acidification and what we can actually do to address coastal acidification. Next slide, please. So about 30% of carbon dioxide from fossil fuel burning dissolves in the ocean. And the balance of the CO2 that remains in the atmosphere is what we think about mostly. It's responsible for planetary warming and changing the climate. But that component of carbon dioxide that dissolves in the ocean creates an acid, and it changes other chemical balances in seawater beyond simply pH. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spare you all the details about how carbon dioxide dissolves, but suffice it to say that carbon dioxide creates an acid when it dissolves in water. And there's two major consequences of this. On the right, you can see pH drops, or another way to say that is the water becomes more acidified. And that is kind of what we are talking about mainly when we talk about ocean acidification. At the same time, the levels of an ion in the water, carbonate ion, also decrease. And decreases in carbonate ion and decreases in pH are associated with the inability or slowed ability of shellfish to grow shells and hard parts. So this affects things that calcify biologically. So corals and shellfish. And we're finding some impacts on crustaceans too, not just bivalve shellfish. There's also some other interesting effects on fish behavior and things like that that are also being determined. Next slide, please. So this is a brief indication of what a lot of scientists are thinking about when they're thinking about ocean acidification proper. So this curve represents some data at a station called Station Aloha, which is north of Hawaii. And at Station Aloha, the water characteristics were measured. So that's the blue and the green traces that we see on this plot. And the red trace is actually a record of atmospheric carbon dioxide levels taken on Mauna Loa, which is a terrestrial measuring station for the atmosphere. So we see carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rising just, from, the 1960s when this record began all the way through today. And this slide is actually pretty outdated by now. But what's important to notice here is the rate of increase of this red line, or the slope of that red line, the angle that it's sitting at, is really the same as the slope of the trend in the seawater carbon dioxide concentration. The seawater is really taking up carbon dioxide in step with the atmosphere. And as a result, we're also seeing the seawater pH at Station Aloha drop, and that's the green trace. Next slide, please. In coastal zones, the story is much more complicated. So this is an example of data collected off the coast of the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And we can see the two characteristic measurements of ocean acidification down the bottom. The bright blue is a pH trace, and the green is a measurement we call omega, which is a measure of the carbonate system, or how easy it is for calcium carbonate minerals to form and dissolve. And you can see that those measurements really kind of bounce around. But when we look up at the top, we can see that there are relationships between some of the variations in the pH and the omega measurements with temperature and with the velocity of the wind, which is in the top on the purple. So you can see the number of factors that come together to really affect ocean acidification variables in the coastal zone. And then here, this is primarily a physically driven system. So changes in wind speed and coastal upwelling are really the things that are driving the changes in pH and saturation state. So upwelling is bringing up water that is rich in carbon dioxide. So it's a little bit of a different mechanism than what we saw at Station Aloha in the open ocean. Next slide, please. It's important to think of when we think about coastal acidification, we recognize that ocean acidification isn't happening all by itself. Along coastlines, there's a number of different factors. We just saw a sample of how physical factors can really affect coastal acidification characteristics, but there are other phenomena that are happening in coastal zones that are really affecting things as well. Here is sort of the highly technical version of other things that alter coastal pH. In addition to carbon dioxide in the red, we also have organic material and metals, nitrogen, which is the same thing that's coming out of watersheds from wastewater and from agricultural fertilizer. And these things fuel processes in the water that actually alter pH. Next slide, please. So if we think about coastal acidification in terms of like different types of processes, we can group the major things that are affecting coastal acidification into 6 categories. First, there's atmospheric gases like carbon dioxide, sulfur and nitrogen acid gases. And then in second, we have point sources, which include the wastewater treatment plant outflows that can carry nitrogen into the coastal zone, or other point sources can release various chemicals that alter pH directly. So the third category is stormwater runoff, which can carry biological material from land, which can be digested by microbes in the coastal zone, or which might just have lower pH and a lower, what we say, buffering capacity than seawater. So this runoff of stormwater can directly lower pH. Fourth, there's runoff of erosion, which is pretty similar to stormwater runoff, but possibly containing a greater fraction of soil and rock weathering products, and maybe a lower fraction of pollutants from something like animal waste or runoff from paved areas. So fifth, we have river input. Rivers can provide calcium and rock weathering products, which have the potential to raise pH and carbonate levels, but they also have lower pH and less buffered water than coastal water. So generally, rivers tend to decrease pH on balance and to worsen coastal acidification. And 6, the final process, which is what we saw in the coastal acidification slide, is upwelling, which brings high carbon dioxide subsurface water up to the surface to alter pH. Next slide, please. So if we think about all of these processes and kind of add them up on a scorecard, on the one side, we can think of processes that generally lower pH. So we have addition of fresh water, and fresh water, I mean, maybe not drinkable water, but not salty water. Point source pollution, atmospheric carbon dioxide, nutrients which lead to primary production by algae and photosynthetic organisms, and then also the washout of organic matter from the coastal zone. Those can both fuel microbial activity, which releases carbon dioxide. Also, nitrogen and sulfur gases, ammonium, and then upwelling of carbon dioxide-rich water are all things that lower pH. And on the raising pH side, things that generally raise pH are rock weathering products that come down in erosion, and then also point source pollution. Next slide, please. What's really interesting here, though, in coastal acidification is that although we have layered processes that alter water pH, and it's really hard to identify which particular process is to blame in a particular case, it's neat because there's a lot of different handlebars from a policy standpoint. The challenge here is to really identify which one is the one that is most relevant in a particular jurisdiction. So the variability of chemistry near shore is so high, and the signals in the pH signal associated with different drivers are relatively much smaller. It's really hard to kind of separate out, well, if we change this particular contributor to the coastal zone, how much of an effect will that have on my coastal situation? That's one of our biggest challenges. It's also really hard to identify the effects of something like groundwater that's percolating through soil types compared to how rainwater washes off of the surface of coastal landscapes. Those are real challenges that are front of mind in coastal acidification research right now. Next slide, please. So what can we do? Here's a graphic showing the categories of action that states and local entities can take. It's from a publication that my colleagues at Ocean Conservancy and I completed in 2016. And actually the content is rolled into the Ocean Acidification Alliance Toolkit. And what I want you to notice here is that not all of these categories are something that jurisdiction can act on at once. Generally, communities begin by first learning about acidification and then closing knowledge gaps. After that, generally comes managing for resilience in coastal systems and supporting affected businesses, while leaders work to cut acidification from, sort of high-level levers. Next slide, please. Something that is a very common first step that different jurisdictions take is investing in monitoring. And here's a sample of something that what monitoring can do for you. These plots are taken from a paper written by a team involved with NOAA's long-term monitoring buoys for acidification. And they looked at the results from 12 buoys located at open ocean, coastal, or coral reef locations over multiple years. Sometimes the time series data spanned more than a decade. The red lines show sea surface temperature. Unfortunately, I cut off the right axis where the temperature scale is shown. And the shaded areas in each, so the grayish shaded areas on the top plots and the bluish shaded areas on the bottom plots, are really showing the estimated monthly levels of these data in the pre-industrial times. And then the box and whisker plots, kind of superimposed over that, show the current day conditions. So this level of detailed monitoring over a long term and over a large number of sites, we're able to really show for these sites how much of the time conditions actually were outside the pre-industrial levels that the local ecosystems had evolved in to become accustomed to. So this is a really neat example of how monitoring can really shed some light on what a system is like today compared to what it might have been like in the past. Next slide, please. So this is another outcome that really marries together observations and user needs. And this is another sort of early action that a particular region took to really push forward understanding of acidification, but also action to offset its impacts on the users in the area. So NOAA's NANUS group, the Northwest Association of Networked Ocean Observing Systems, created an app for shellfish growers to alert them when growing conditions were unfavorable because of ocean acidification. So that, that piece of information helps them optimize when to carry out certain activities, when to clean out and refill culture tanks, or when to set out juveniles for grow out. And this activity came out because of really strong collaboration among scientists, managers, and users to really stitch together the information that is available from the scientists in products that really suit user needs. And so this is just one example of how local leaders are really bringing together policy and implementation needs to address acidification. The next opportunities that are available really relate to addressing individual sources that worsen coastal acidification. And I think the next talks are going to talk a little bit more about that. So with that, thank you for your attention. Next slide has my email address on it. I'm happy to answer questions if we have time, or certainly by email. So thank you all so much for your attention.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah, and apologies for my mouse is kind of doing some weird stuff, and really appreciate your time today with that presentation. So I'm just going to unplug my mouse and see what happens after this. Oh no, there we go. Okay, great. So Sean, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Jesse?
I can, and maybe that was our problem there. Great. So thanks so much, Sean, joining us today from the California Coastkeeper Alliance, and you'll give us just a little bit of a background on who you are, and then give an overview of the types of actions that you have seen and witnessed, how local governments can further engage in this issue. And let me make sure I'm admitting people here. Apologies. Okay. All right, Sean, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks, Jesse, and thanks everyone for having me today. My name is Sean Bothwell. I'm the Executive Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. It's really great to be here today to speak on this, and I want to thank the OA Alliance for providing us the opportunity to present. For those of you that don't know us, we're part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance, and California Coastkeeper specifically represents 11 watershed-based waterkeepers here in California. Our primary focus is water quality protections, specifically at the land-sea interface, where urban and agricultural runoff is the primary cause of pollution. So with that lens, California Coastkeeper has really been focused on what actions, specifically on the ground level actions, the state, regions, and local governments can take to prevent localized ocean acidification hotspots, and how we can really make our ocean more climate resilient. Next slide, please. So my presentation today is going to cover 4 general buckets of action items local governments can take to build ocean and climate resiliency. Those buckets start with minimizing emissions, because the most important thing we can do to limit ocean acidification is to reduce carbon emissions in the first place. The second bullet is largely focused on how we can manage water quality inputs to prevent the creation of ocean acidification hotspots. In this bucket, we'll look at wastewater, stormwater, and agricultural pollution. And then bucket 3 is all about how we protect our most biologically significant marine areas to act as hope spots by minimizing as many stressors as we can control, including overfishing and sources of water pollution. And then the last bucket I'll discuss is what we can do to restore critical ecosystems that will not only sequester carbon, but will improve water quality, provide healthy marine habitats, and enhance coastal resiliency to sea level rise. So next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with minimizing emissions. And really the first step to minimizing emissions is to develop and implement climate action plans, which I know the OA Alliance and all of you have really been the leaders on developing over the last several years. The other two actions I'm going to discuss are largely focused on how ports and coastal regions can reduce coastal emissions from shipping. So one option for ports is to invest in renewables and shoreside power options. I know, for example, India was the first nation to have all government-owned ports running on solar and wind energy. And shoreside power is already required for certain ports in Alaska, Canada, and California. Other ports like Seattle and New York are investing millions of dollars in developing sophisticated power systems. And here in California, existing rules require most container ships, refrigerated ships, and cruise ships to use shore power when docked in ports rather than to run their auxiliary engines. The second action item ports and coastal communities can do to minimize carbon emissions is to incentivize ships to reduce speeds in coastal shipping lanes and while entering ports. There's been many vessel speed reduction programs that have already demonstrated the multiple benefits provided. That includes reducing carbon and other harmful air particulates in coastal communities, preventing whale strikes, and reducing ambient noise. Next slide, please. So under the bucket of management, we suggest numerous clean water actions local and regional governments can take to prevent ocean acidification hotspots caused by water quality pollution. Starting with wastewater, scientific research has demonstrated that large ocean wastewater facilities are causing ocean acidification hotspots through their discharge of treated effluent. So it's critical that ocean wastewater facilities begin to further treat their discharges to remove nutrients. Additionally, local governments can set goals to recycle their ocean discharges to reduce the amount of nutrients discharged while providing an additional source of domestic water supply. California has set a statewide goal to recycle all ocean wastewater that can be recycled for potable reuse by 2040. And Los Angeles has committed to recycling all of their wastewater by 2035, which will reduce their dependence on importing water. That would jump LA's use of recycled water from 2% to 35% of their total water use. Second, local governments should prevent stormwater runoff from urban communities. Depending on where you're from, stormwater is usually carried to the ocean through a combined sewer system, or sometimes a municipality will engineer a separate stormwater system to convey water directly to the ocean. In either case, it is critical that local governments begin capturing stormwater runoff and infiltrating it into the ground, or diverting the storm event to a facility that can recycle the water without causing sewer overflows. There are many cities in the US, including Portland, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, just to name a few, that have really invested millions in low impact development to create green infrastructure that will capture and reuse stormwater so that it doesn't end up in our ocean. And for those municipalities with combined sewer and stormwater systems, it's critical to upgrade those systems to ensure overflows are not leaking nutrients into the ocean and further exacerbating ocean acidification hotspots. And then the last key area under management is to prevent nutrient runoff from agricultural operations. For irrigated agriculture, it's critical that riparian setbacks are incentivized to prevent nutrients and pesticides from running off of fields and into our waterways, which eventually end up flowing into the ocean. For both irrigated agriculture and concentrated animal operations, like dairies, it's important to set nutrient application limits. Many agricultural communities suffer from groundwater pollution and harmful algae blooms, largely due to the over-application of fertilizers. So it's important to regulate the application of fertilizers by creating limits that would cap the amount of fertilizer used by the crop uptake needed. And finally, it's critical that governments keep cattle grazing out of the waterways and riparian areas to prevent excessive nutrient inputs that can lead to harmful algae blooms and further exacerbate ocean acidification. Next slide, please. So the next bucket of actions is really how we can protect our special marine areas so they act as hope spots in the face of climate change. Over the last number of years, the amount of MPAs and the spatial extent of them has increased rapidly. In 2000, the area covered by marine reserves was about 0.7% of the ocean. But since then, there's been over a tenfold increase in marine protection coverage, making about 7.5% of the ocean now covered by some sort of marine protection. So these hope spots are critical as climate change exacerbates the effects of numerous other stressors on species populations, such as pollution and habitat destruction. So reducing stressors such as overfishing and pollution in these marine protected areas will help marine life better cope with changes in their environment due to climate change. And then in addition to creating new marine protected areas, it's also critical that local governments improve water quality by reducing the amount of polluted runoff entering protected areas. So this picture here in the upper left hand, this isn't a natural waterway. This is just dry weather runoff coming from a golf course and the surrounding neighborhood. This runoff contains excessive nutrients, pesticides, and bacteria, and yet the water flows untreated directly into the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. So one recommendations for local governments, besides just the creation of marine protected areas to limit overfishing, is also to include water quality protections for those areas to really preserve natural background water quality. Next slide, please. So our last bucket is to restore key ecosystems that not only improve water quality and provide resilient habitat, they can also provide living shorelines for local communities facing sea level rise. So the restoration and creation of new wetlands is a key action local communities can take. And I want to take a quick second to mention the growing trend of beneficial reuse, which is taking dredged sediment from our ports and our harbors and reusing it for wetland creation instead of dumping it out into the ocean. Here in the United States, the U.S. Army Corps is actually funding regional pilot programs right now to pay the incremental difference between dumping the sediment out into the ocean wastefully and instead using it for wetland restoration. So another strategy is restoring seagrass, kelp, and mangrove forests to sequester carbon, improve water quality, and provide more resilient habitat. And then finally, restoring oyster beds is another key strategy for creating living shorelines and making our coastal communities more resilient to sea level rise at the same time. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, but I wanted to provide a menu of various options of the things I just spoke about. And the subtitle for today's presentation was, what role can local and regional governments play? And from my organization's perspective, this is the menu of actions. It's not a complete list, but it's a pretty solid list of actions a government can take to minimize ocean acidification locally while making the ocean more resilient to climate change generally. And I realize, some of these options might be better suited for some regions rather than others. Some actions might not necessarily be as feasible or as multi-beneficial for your particular region. But I do think there are enough feasible multi-benefit options here for local governments to internationally pick from to minimize ocean acidification locally. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation, but really excited to be here and happy to answer any questions you might have at the end of the case studies. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sean. That was a great way to set up our next set of presenters that are going to give us a little bit more of a zoomed in version of what that looks like and what these menu of actions look like in their jurisdiction and how they're thinking about integrating ocean acidification across some of the existing frameworks and existing actions that they already have set up. So, so thank you so much. And let's see here, great. And continuing to let people in, I'm sorry, struggling for folks. There we go. Great. Okay, so zooming in here, we're going to hear from 4 different partners of the OA Alliance who have been active in thinking about this linkage between their work and ocean acidification. So first up, we'll hear from Angela Daniluk with the City of Vancouver in British Columbia. And Angela, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Great. Yeah. And I'll just remind folks who are listening here, our webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes. So we've got another hour or so. I don't expect that we'll take the whole hour, but just want to give folks a time expectation that we'll have about 4 more presentations, about 8 minutes or so each, and then stand for questions. So Angela, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today and spending some time with us. I think we're on slide 8 there, so we can. Okay, that's no worries. I'm just going to, yeah, like kind of pick up where Sean left off about, you know, what we're doing in Vancouver, and highlighting a lot of the work that we're doing contributes to mitigating ocean acidification. And I didn't really, we didn't really put that together until, you know, joining the Alliance. And so I will go through some of that thinking. And yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Chelsea Borsoi, who's on the call, who created this presentation, and just give some thanks out to Chelsea. So next slide. So this presentation here where I am is taking place on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and just like to acknowledge that we are on these lands, and that we at the city have a lot to learn from the host nations, and who have a deep connection in the past, the present, and the future to the ocean, and the healthy, a healthy one at that. Next slide. So yeah, just giving some historical context, why it matters to us, because some people are like, what? Why are you digging into this? It's the federal government's jurisdiction in Canada. And we'll talk about that, and how, you know, actually get to it, like how we're thinking of OA and some projects. Next slide. So yeah, so pre-contact Vancouver looked very different, much like the Pacific Northwest. It had a lot of natural systems that buffered against, you know, any changes in ocean chemistry or the environment. Next slide. But that has changed. Here's a picture of Vancouver, of False Creek, in fact, how it used to be in 1890. And for those of you who are familiar with Vancouver, if you were to continue on that main road north, you would see the bulb of Science World on your left, and you would see concrete on your right. So in the 1912, the city ordered or approved the filling in of that land. So where there's water on the right hand side, it's no longer, it's the False Creek Flats. Next slide. And then again, more development in the 30s, more industry moved into False Creek and our surrounding coastline. Next slide. And we buried a lot of our creeks. So we really, you know, went gung-ho, like a lot of cities, to create combined sewer outflows to really diminish the natural capacity of our systems, our ecosystems, to manage themselves and provide a healthy, you know, healthy water and food and culture. This also paved the way, and why I show these pictures, to like give light to like policy decisions and how they land in space and time. This, you know, created the opportunity for pollutants to enter into our receiving bodies and exacerbate ocean acidification. Next slide. And so today we have this. This is False Creek. We're focusing a lot on False Creek these days. It is the Central Park, some say, of Vancouver, to borrow from my colleagues in New York City. And it's quite a special place to be, even though it's changed, and even though it's quite removed from those pre-contact days. Next slide. And so basically, when I talk to folks about OA, you know, they're like, well, why does it matter? The waters around Vancouver and the Salish Sea are naturally acidic because we have a big island called Vancouver Island and other conditions that make it more acidic. So we're more vulnerable to ocean acidification. And it's not, OA isn't, you know, reversible within 7 generations. And we apply that logic to a lot of our climate work. So why wouldn't we apply it to our ocean work? We are a coastal community. Sometimes we forget that, but we have strong cultural, recreation, and economic ties to the ocean. And so if we, you know, disregard what is happening, we are definitely making things difficult for us in the future. Vulnerable people are way more at risk to the impacts, again, the economic impacts, but also the recreation and the cultural impacts of ocean acidification. And we at the city, we have a commitment to reconciliation and equity. And so that is really driving a lot of our policy decisions. Vancouver, while we are small, we're only a city of 650,000, and we don't have a lot of jurisdictional authority with respect to OA. We have a lot of leadership, and so do a lot of other cities and towns. And we need to think of that soft power and how we can use it to raise, people's attention to this issue. And also, why does OA matter to Vancouver? Well, we're already doing a lot of work about it. So why not actually connect that work to OA? Because not everyone in the public are really turned on by, combating greenhouse gases or these other big hairy problems. A lot of people, they connect with the ocean, they connect with the shoreline. So let's provide many opportunities for people to connect with our work. Next slide. And so, yeah, just a jurisdictional context for Canada. I'm not sure if there's other Canadians on the call or if this is well known. The federal government, with headquarters based in Ottawa, they manage most of our ocean, and so fisheries, water quality, that's their jam. The province, they also manage water quality in relation to inland fisheries and contaminated sites and compliance. And then we have our regional government, which manages water from from wastewater treatment plants. So that leaves us in local government with a very tiny sphere of actual input and impact to regulate water quality and therefore ocean acidification. Next slide. That's okay, because while we might not have a lot of hard power, we have big audacious ideas and the will to change how we design and plan and engineer our city. So next slide. We took, inspiration from Jesse and the Alliance and basically, looked at the 5 tenets or bullets of the Alliance's action plan, and we thought, hey, we can answer these calls. And so we are looking to invest in, or we are investing in local research about our ecosystems by collaborating with universities and students, providing them with really unique and enriching opportunities to learn and providing us with new information about our ecosystems. We're looking at how we can invest in negative emissions through nature-based carbon sequestration. We have major strategies and policy around the climate emergency and dramatically reducing our greenhouse gases, and the Rain City strategy dramatically, changing the way we plan our city and infiltrating and collecting that water to make sure it's clean before it goes into the receiving water bodies. And we're looking to, educate and mainstream, OA, and what is it? Because it's really in Vancouver, it's kind of weird, but we have a low environmental literacy within the city. And that's because of our history. We developed before any environmental regulation came to pass in British Columbia. So there's that. And then we're also looking to expand public awareness as part of our sea level rise programming. And that's been really fun and interesting. And we want to support collaborations or collaboratives like the OA. And so we are working to be, contributing members of this group. Next slide. So just here's some snapshots of some of the projects that I wanted to highlight on is how we do OA. And it's our climate emergency response. We have 6 big moves. You can see them on the board, but basically they're the call to, we can't go past 1.5 degrees. So that's our target that we're trying to hit. Next slide. We have the Rain City strategy. It's very transformative and it's underway here. We are looking to capture and clean a minimum of 90% of Vancouver's average rainfall. It rains a lot here, but we are working to, work with the public, work with developers, and such to get us to where we need to be. Next slide. We have an adaptation strategy, and that's where we inserted, a line item, and you can see it on the board about ocean acidification. So to give presence, official status to this work. And so I don't want to pretend to say we're going to solve it or we're inserting, monitoring stations, because we don't have that capacity, but just starting to get the, the ball rolling so that in 5 years we're that much better than where we are now is something that we can do. Next slide. We're looking again for co-benefits with the work that we do. So here's a picture of a park where it looks like all that red tape or that red fencing is, that was all land. And so Parks collaborated with the Port of Vancouver to actually restore this salt marsh, which is definitely a form of adaptation and can provide some, you know, alleviate some of the impacts that OA may have. Next slide. And then again, I mean, I'm pretty sure Seattle or a lot of my American Pacific Northwest folks are on the call, and they are like leaps and bounds ahead of us in with some of these rain gardens and green infrastructure. So there's some great examples there. But these are kind of the examples of how we are infiltrating and cleaning water in Vancouver. Next slide. And just some more, we're as part of the Rain City Strategy, Vancouver Plan, and engineering's work, we're looking to create blue-green systems that combine GI, so green infrastructure, as well as low carbon transportation, so walking and biking paths. Next slide. And so basically, at the local scale, these are just kind of the key messages that when you question, you're like, wow, you know, like I've got so much on my plate and how do I do this? And I'm like, you know, go to the OA Alliance's website and you'll see those 5, you know, bullets of what you can do. Chances are you are already doing this work, or you can use OA as part of the business case to launch, you know, action on climate change or clean up your stormwater or form partnerships. I hosted a workshop on blue carbon 2 years ago, and you know, we're still in contact, we're still learning, and now we're meeting in a week, and it's not a lot of work, but it's work that will definitely change the way I do my projects. And I think, you know, the public loves the ocean. This is a winner. Next slide. So that's it. Those are just a snapshot from Vancouver. If you have any questions, please give me a holler on the email and we can talk more. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was, as always, a great presentation, and really can't say enough how much we appreciate City of Vancouver's leadership in helping kind of unpack, you know, some of this work and make it tangible and make it understandable and connected to existing actions and priorities. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll get some time for good questions at the end here. All right. John, next we'll have John Sloan from the Port of Seattle here in Washington State, who's the Senior Manager of Environmental Programs. John, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. All right, and again, everyone's bearing with me, but I think I've admitted folks, and here we go. All right, John, take it away.
Great, thanks, Jesse. And before we advance to the next slide, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and honor that the Port of Seattle operates on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, and their contribution to our culture, our economy, and our environment continues to this day. And we're especially grateful for the important and productive partnerships that we have with tribal communities. With that, if you can advance to the next slide. So similar to Angela's question, where she asked why is the Port of Vancouver, or not Port, City of Vancouver interested in OA, you might ask the same about a port. And we have a goal here is to answer that question, to be the greenest port in North America. And so we're promoting a number of different environmental programs and projects, some of which directly or at least indirectly benefit the fight against OA. And we're the first port in the world to join the OA Alliance, of which we're very proud. And I want to give a shout out before we go too much further to 2 Washington Sea Grant Fellows who are on the call today, who just started with us this morning, that are going to be helping us to develop an action plan, Dorothy Mulkern and Elise Lasky. Next slide. So as a new member, Jesse told us that we need to put together an action plan, and I didn't really know what that would take. So I pulled up their website and discovered they have a great toolkit available there where they present criteria that we need to address in an action plan. And I figured I would use those criteria to organize this presentation. Next slide. The first criteria has to do with reducing atmospheric emissions of CO2. And this is a little out of my wheelhouse. This is handled by another team in my department, but I will point out a few things that we're doing here. The first is our Century Agenda we passed in 2011. It has us reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and becoming carbon neutral by 2050, at least for those emission sources that we control. The second is our Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy, which has been in effect for some time and we're currently updating. It's a collaborative effort with the Port of Vancouver and other ports that's set some pretty aggressive clean air strategy goals. And the third, we just hired staff to help us develop a waterfront clean energy strategic plan for Seattle. And the goal there is to decarbonize the Seattle waterfront. If you want more information about any of those things, get at me and I will provide it. Next slide. The next criteria has to do with advancing scientific understanding of OA and other climate-related impacts, and this is a little more in my wheelhouse. So the port is not really a science agency, but we are contributing in several ways. The first thing I'll describe in our action plan is our carbon mapping project, and I have a slide or two about that. And the second, I'll tell you a little about our blue carbon study we're doing out at Smith Cove, where we have a cruise terminal. And what we're doing out there is measuring changes in pH and carbon sequestration associated with near-shore restoration actions that we've taken. And last, I'll describe some research we're involved with to explore the utility of floating wetland islands, we also call biobarges, to improve water quality and habitat. Next slide. This slide illustrates the carbon mapping project that we have underway, where we're using GIS to delineate different types of land cover on the approximately 1,500 acres of upland property that we own in Seattle, as well as 15.4 miles of shoreline that we control. And the idea here is that we classify the land cover and then relate it to a carbon sequestration value. For example, we know that unvegetated uplands like a parking lot or a building roof sequesters virtually 0 tons of carbon, whereas a forested area sequesters around 1.08 tons of carbon. So we can use this information once we've got the maps developed to develop a strategy for converting carbon poor areas in our landscape to ones that are more carbon rich. And we know that carbon rich shorelines and landscapes are more conducive to a healthy carbon cycle, which benefits OA conditions, at least locally. Next slide. The first step in our mapping exercise involved hiring a consultant to review the literature and come up with reasonable approximations of carbon content in the different land cover types measured in tons or metric tons of carbon per acre per year that gets sequestered. And these land cover types range from unvegetated uplands to deep subtidal environments. And the consultant was the Watershed Company out of Redmond, Washington, came up with a unique value for each cover type. Next slide. Here's an example of some of the values they came up with. And as you see here, riparian buffer forest has a very high carbon sequestration potential, over a metric or a ton of carbon per acre per year. And marshes, mudflats, eelgrass areas, and kelp forests also have significant potential, but lower than riparian forest. Next slide. So to test the assumptions that the Watershed Company came up with, we developed a pilot study at Smith Cove, which involves restoring riparian forest shellfish beds using Olympia oysters and eelgrass meadow and enhancing a bull kelp area. We've completed quite a bit of this restoration work. We still got work to do, but meanwhile, we've installed pH sensors both inside and outside the restoration area, and we're taking sediment cores to measure increases in carbon that start to accrue over time. And what we hope to learn there is whether the restored habitat is successfully offsetting ocean acidification, at least locally, while also tying up greenhouse gases in the sediments and the above ground biomass that would otherwise end up in the atmosphere and contribute to climate change. Next slide. This is a fun project that we're involved with the University of Washington and King County and a few other partners that we call the Floating Wetland Islands. And what this is rafts, artificial rafts of floating wetland vegetation, and the roots hang down in the water where we suspect they take up contaminants, improve water quality, potentially even affect pH and other parameters. And we hope, I guess the main reason for these islands is to provide fish and wildlife habitat in the highly constrained industrial waterways that we operate in, where we really don't have a lot of space to do more conventional shoreline restoration. Next slide. Third criteria that we have to address in our action plan has to do with reducing pollution that exacerbates OA. And here I'll point to the Maritime Division stormwater utility that we created a few years ago. We're assessing fees to our tenants that will help us better manage stormwater. It's interesting, we have to manage 1.2 billion gallons of stormwater from our 1,500 acres annually. That's 78 miles of pipe, over 2,700 catch basins. And over time, we kind of lost track of what was what over a 120-year period the port's been in existence. And so the first step was mapping the systems and then focusing on ways that we can improve our stormwater management. And one of the most exciting things is the green stormwater infrastructure opportunities that are created. Next slide. These green systems can reduce nutrients, metals, and turbidity. And one of the things that I think is pretty cool that we're playing with is using oyster shells in barrels and in catch basins to remove primarily metals, but I'm interested to learn through our OA work is whether they might also have some effect in buffering pH. Next slide. Fourth criteria in our action plan will be associated with protecting the environment, coastal communities from OA and associated climate impacts. And here we'll point to two things. One, our alternative bankline stabilization program. We recently created this program to identify opportunities where we can remove shoreline armor, such as riprap, steel sheet pile bulkheads, and other sorts of structural stabilization measures with greener and more carbon-rich alternatives. And we also have a program to improve public access on our shorelines through a system of parks and public access sites. Next slide. As context, the Port of Seattle manages 15.4 miles of shoreline, as I mentioned, along which we've identified 32 potential habitat restoration sites. Some of them already have been restored. And we also have 21 shoreline parks, soon to be 23. We have one that's currently under construction and another that's in design and will be built next year. Next slide. This photo on the left is a park that's currently under construction. It's also a shoreline restoration. It's about a half mile of the Duwamish River that we're widening and installing shoreline habitat features. It's essentially converting a contaminated and carbon poor site to a carbon-rich fish and wildlife habitat area. It will also support public use in an environmental justice neighborhood on the Duwamish, the South Park community. And in the well-designed park that we have there it's in short supply in South Park. So we're providing an amenity to the community where we can educate them about environmental features, tribal treaty rights, climate change impacts, and other important topics. Next slide. This is kind of an example of what we find along the Duwamish, along much of our footprints. It's a carbon poor shoreline. Maybe 90% or greater of the Duwamish waterway looks this way. Mineral soils, riprap, vertical bulkheads, pavement, and it's not the kind of environment that's supportive of a healthy carbon cycle and not really useful towards combating OA. Next slide. We've developed techniques to remove the carbon poor elements and replace them with carbon rich elements where possible, where it's compatible with our operations. What we use is compost, topsoil, logs, forest plants, and emergent marsh plants, all of which sequester carbon. So we're promoting carbon sequestration and we're helping local effects of OA at the same time. It also provides habitat for endangered species such as Chinook salmon, which in turn benefit the southern resident killer whales, which are an endangered species that we're working hard to conserve. Next slide. This is kind of a typical situation on the Duwamish, riprap and bulkheads, very, very carbon poor environment. Next slide. This is our restoration project at Terminal 108, and logs, topsoil, vegetation, turning it into a very carbon-rich soil or very carbon-rich site. We estimate this will sequester over 1 ton of carbon per acre per year as it grows. Next slide. The last criteria that I want to talk about that we'll address in our action plan involves creating public awareness of OA and climate issues generally. And here I generally point out that the work we're doing with area youth in the Duwamish Valley through the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps, another organization called Dirt Corps, is building out a community-based stewardship and community-based science program that we're really just getting started. working with numerous partners on those initiatives, including the University of Washington, the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and a number of NGOs. We're also actively increasing our participation in local, regional, and national seminars and conferences to get the word out about our work, which is kind of like what I'm doing here today. So I want to close there, just trying to give you a broad snapshot of the different things that we're doing currently that we think contribute to fighting OA, and that we'll be memorializing or articulating in our action plan. And then what I really look forward to is looking forward to projects that can more directly expand our involvement in fighting OA, and hope to present that to you in the future. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share, and turn it back to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, John. Always appreciate that presentation and perspective. And it's just really exciting to see the leadership, and we are thrilled that the Port of Seattle is the first port, I'll say, in the world to join the OA Alliance, and certainly welcome more members to join and to sort of find inspiration in some of this type of work and rationale. So with that, we'll go ahead and move over to the other side, or across the Pacific. And I am really delighted and super grateful to have Janine Kamke, I hope is the right way I'm saying that, Janine, join from Waikato Regional Council in New Zealand. And really just to give a perspective from both a different geography, but also a different type of governance jurisdiction. So from the regional council's perspective, how are you thinking about ocean acidification? How does it impact resources that you're working to manage? And how have you been kind of conceptualizing some of this work? So Janine, can you hear me okay?
Yep, thanks.
All right, great. And I'll just remind folks listening along, thank you so much for participating today. And we'll have this presentation followed by one more from Florida, and then we'll hopefully get into some questions. All right, go ahead, Janine.
Good morning, everyone from New Zealand. Yeah, I'm Janine. I'm a coastal water quality scientist in New Zealand, working for Waikato Regional Council. And so, me being a scientist, this is going to be a bit more science heavy than some of the other talks. Hope that's fine. Next slide, please. So I just want to introduce us a little bit. So the Waikato Regional Council is looking after the Waikato region. It's one of 16 regions and in New Zealand that are managed by regional authorities. And we're looking after an area in sort of mid to northern part of the North Island, 25,000 square kilometers area, and including 10,000 square kilometers area of coastal marine area. We have many responsibilities, but like the one that I'll focus on here is the natural resource management for our areas, and in the coastal space, and not only there but everywhere else. It includes state of the environment monitoring, and includes setting policies and regulations to protect natural resources and manage them efficiently, and also enforce those rules. Next slide, please. Right. So the part that I'm going to focus on today is the Firth of Thames. It's a large embayment in the northern part of our region that has a lot of history, a lot of values, and a lot of pressures to the system. And we could basically call it an OA hotspot. You can see the two maps on the left there that show you on the very left the wetland extent in the catchment of that bay before the settlement of the Europeans coming to New Zealand. And then the right map is what happened after they settled. So we had a massive wetland clearance in the catchment of this embayment, which basically caused a rocky shore reef system that was in the bay to collapse, and now we're having a mud flat based system. The system is based on the research that's been done there, is catchment driven. So 70% of the total nitrogen inputs from that catchment come from the catchment. So heavily catchment driven. It's mostly the major land use of that catchment now is it's pasture, it's intensive dairy farming. So there's quite a lot of pressure, but still the Firth of Thames is still a very, very highly valued embayment water body in our region. It's very important for the local Maori tribes, so the iwi, and other community groups. There's a lot of interest sort of from industrial point of view as aquaculture for green-lipped mussels. It also has a lot of protected habitats. There's a wetland of national significance, the Ramsar site, for shorebirds nesting there. There's huge amounts of mangrove forests. And like the interests of that has been recently sort of combined within the greater area there. The Hauraki Gulf Marine Spatial Plan is called Sea Change. Look it up if you want to have a look. It's trying to create a spatial plan of bringing all those interests together and mapping out marine protected areas for aquaculture, and trying to bring all those interests back together in quite an ambitious project. Next slide, please. So for us as the regional council, it's quite important to learn about such an important water body within our region, and learn about the work that has been happening there and the pressures that we face. And ocean acidification is one of them that we focus on there. And luckily, there's a lot of research in New Zealand that has happened in that area and focused on not only the Firth of Thames, but also including the Firth of Thames. There's, just to mention a few, is a project called CARIM that some of you might have heard already from. It's looking at pH variability over New Zealand and using three case study sites, which one of them is the Firth of Thames. Looks at ecosystem impacts and then looks at specific key species and their resilience. Then there's the New Zealand Ocean Acidification Observation Network, which looks at long-term monitoring data for carbon chemistry across the country, and also has monitoring stations in the Firth of Thames. And the National Institute for Water and Atmosphere in New Zealand has done years of research within the Hauraki Gulf and including the Firth of Thames, lots of research surveys that also included ocean acidification work. And we've, as a council, have commissioned a report to summarize all that work recently, which is still about to be released. And my next few slides are going to summarize that really, really briefly of what the findings are. Next slide, please. So in the Firth of Thames, research clearly showed that, well, obviously we have really, really high nutrient influx from agriculture, high nitrogen loads into the system. We have water column stratification in the Firth of Thames that mainly during late summer and autumn, and it leads to low oxygen conditions in the bottom waters. They found reduced denitrification rates within the system over the years, and that obviously making nitrogen even more available for phytoplankton production. So we've got high phytoplankton production, which then fuels heterotrophic organisms, and the whole system is net heterotrophic, so it's producing CO2, and as a result, we've got enhanced acidification. The system has a gradient. You can see that in that top figure there, showing that there's clearly an impact from the fresh water, bringing in cooler river water, bringing low salinity water, and fueling chlorophyll A, so phytoplankton blooms, and then decreasing pH as a result. So at the moment, the current pH observed in the Firth of Thames is the equivalent to the one projected for the global ocean by 2100 under the business as usual scenario under climate change predictions. So we've got a quite a impacted system there. The pH that we observe goes as low as 7.0 as a minimum. You can see in the second picture that the last 3 box plots are from the Firth of Thames, showing the lowest median pH values in all of New Zealand, and also showing the greatest variability of pH values within that system. So quite a bit of pressure, mainly catchment driven. Next slide, please. Just to briefly sort of summarize the results that that wonderful research from all these teams have produced for some of the key species that they were looking at. So green-lipped mussels are one of New Zealand's main aquaculture products and are also grown in the Firth of Thames. The larval, embryo, and late juvenile stages show some vulnerability to low pH, and whereas when they're adult stages, their growth and the survival is relatively resilient. Power, or what you might know as abalone, larvae are highly sensitive to lower pH, so we get quite a bit of pressure in there. Snappers, very important recreational and industrial fish species here. The larvae are relatively resistant to low pH, but warmer temperatures are putting some pressure also on those. And then similarly, phytoplankton also shows a combination of sensitivity to a combination of warming and lower pH, and the warming seems to affect it a bit more, generally leading to lower diversity, and may impact the food webs. So we've got quite a bit of pressure on the organisms that live in this system. Next slide, please. So with all those pressures, the values that are important for that particular embayment, we as a regional council decided to reinstate a state of the environment monitoring for this embayment, and for the first time include carbon chemistry and report on ocean acidification parameters. This is relatively new, so we are really just starting out. We started in June 2020 this year to monitor at 10 sites monthly. We have 2 buoys in the water that are not collecting carbon chemistry data, but collecting supporting data. And yeah, we're taking CTD and DO profiles, and also looking at the microalgae and bacterial assessments to get a complete picture of what is happening in that system, and hopefully be able to report long-term state and trends for this embayment. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we're still sort of really in the beginning, and it's really great to see what all of you guys are doing, sort of, and that's what we're hoping to move towards. So, but for us, for now, we are sort of we'll continue our monitoring and include the ocean acidification in the state of the environment monitoring. We're exploring to combine efforts with research partners and stakeholders within New Zealand and also internationally. Be great to exchange experiences. Very important for us is to create awareness, especially that as a regional government, that localized acidification is something to look out for, and that there needs to be a connection to freshwater management to manage those downstream effects. So upcoming policy for the freshwater management needs to consider the effects for the downstream. And then finally, we as a science department basically want to further investigate what we can do. So we want to get a better understanding of catchment loading processes in the embayment and looking at the tidal areas of the two major rivers feeding into that system, and want to also further investigate the relationship between catchment loads, denitrification, and ocean acidification. And then finally, like the main goal is to establish acceptable load limits that we can actually, put towards policymakers, so that we can start, bettering the situation. So yeah, that was my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Janine. It's fabulous to have your perspective and work around the region of New Zealand and some of that monitoring on display, and really appreciate your perspective and getting up early to join us today. So final presentation, and I guess we will just end right on time. We'll go over now to the Gulf of Mexico, to Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And really excited to have Maya Burke here today to give us our final presentation and talk a little bit more about the estuary program's work and how ocean acidification has become more integrated into it, and how they're thinking about monitoring and some of the actions that they can take or continue to take that are relevant to OA as well as bay cleanup. So Maya, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Great. So I'll go ahead and get you started here.
All right. Well, I'll do my best to keep us on time and on track as much as possible. While you're pulling up my presentation, my name is Maya Burke. I'm the Science Policy Coordinator for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And I want to talk to you all a little bit today about how our efforts to address cultural eutrophication and seagrass restoration were sort of our backdoor entryway into these coastal acidification issues that we're all here learning about today. Next slide. So just a little bit about the Tampa Bay watershed. We are the largest open water estuary in the state of Florida, and we're located on the west central coast of the peninsula. We're a highly urbanized region. We have 3 large ports, and it's really sort of the heart and center of our culture and our way of life here in Tampa Bay. Next slide. So the Tampa Bay Estuary Program is a partnership of the federal, state, regional, and mostly local governments. So when you hear what the Tampa Bay Estuary Program is doing, I hope that you're also hearing that this is actions that local governments are taking because local governments are our members. That is who we are and who we are working on behalf. So everything that we do through the Estuary Program is something that our local government partners are critical and key participants in implementing. Next slide. So the Tampa Bay Estuary Program was formed as a national estuary program in the 1990s, and really the catalyst for our formation was environmental decline. From the period of the 1950s to the early 1990s, we experienced significant environmental decline in Tampa Bay. And so you see these large macroalgae blooms here in the photograph, and really 60 Minutes was on a spree of declaring water bodies dead in environmental disasters, and Tampa Bay was one of those. So in response to the decline of seagrass and water quality within the region, the estuary program was formed. And really our primary charge was to address water quality associated with cultural eutrophication, nitrogen loading to the bay. Next slide. So our management paradigm to address this water quality issue was really, we're managing first for seagrass. So our goal all along was to reduce nitrogen loads to the point that we could reduce algae growth and have enough water clarity, sufficient water clarity to support seagrass growth and reproduction. So that's really the key place that all of our partners were coming from. And so they banded together and we formed something called the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. This is a public-private partnership of local governments and other entities that discharge some sort of nitrogen load to Tampa Bay. And collectively and voluntarily, all of these entities agreed to hold the line on the amount of nitrogen that they were discharging to the bay. And they agreed to collectively work together to implement various projects that would reduce and hold the line on that nitrogen load that was going into the bay for the benefit of seagrass and water quality. So you can see here we track the efforts of all of the partners who participate in the Nitrogen Management Consortium through something called our Action Plan Database. And basically through regulatory actions like the Grizzle Fig Bill, which required advanced wastewater treatment or the removal of wastewater discharge into the bay, through stormwater management improvements, fertilizer regulations, and a variety of other water quality improvement projects, we've been able to meet those targets that were voluntarily set and have later been codified into regulations. And have been successful in sort of changing what the nutrient load to Tampa Bay looks like. So, you know, we're just convening partners, but it is local governments who have made this commitment and who have done these projects, precluded nitrogen loads to the bay, and spent the public funds necessary to make these improvements to Tampa Bay. Next slide. And the great news is that it works. That sort of collaboration has worked. We've seen it work here in Tampa Bay, and we've had the subsequent seagrass recovery. So for what we lost from the 1950s, we really have water now that is as clear as it was in 1950s to support seagrass at the levels that we had set out to manage for. And so in 2014 is when we met our 38,000 acre target for seagrass in Tampa Bay, and we've continued to build upon those management successes, and we now harbor over 40,000 acres of seagrass in Tampa Bay. Next slide. So as we are monitoring our seagrass recovery associated with nitrogen load reductions, and we're looking at our routine monitoring programs, we began to observe a interesting trend in pH conditions in Tampa Bay, which led us to ask this question: well, they seem to be tracking together quite nicely. Is it possible that seagrass is buffering the effects of ocean acidification within the Tampa Bay estuary? Next slide. And so we partnered with a couple of our local universities, as well as the USGS and some private firms like ESA, and conducted a pilot study that began to measure whether or not the biological effects of seagrass through photosynthesis and others could be locally elevating pH conditions. And in fact, we were able to confirm through this pilot study that seagrass can locally elevate pH conditions, but there was a lot of diurnal variability and some tidal control issues that we needed to investigate further. Next slide. So with the help of support from EPA and grant funding from some of our local government partners, we were able to establish a couple of different monitoring stations that began to explore this relationship further. So you see here we have one monitoring station located in just like lower middle Tampa Bay, and then another monitoring station 60 miles off shore in the Gulf of Mexico, so that we could really tease out the effects. Like, is this part of a trend that is larger than just Tampa Bay? Is this a Gulf of Mexico trend, or is this in fact something that we can tie and attribute to seagrass restoration efforts within Tampa Bay? So again, you see a lot of our partners that we've worked together with in terms of funding and logistical support. We're using already established platforms, which has helped save us a lot of money. But in fact, we're continuing to get these results that are showing indeed it does look like there is a positive influence on from seagrass restoration on our pH trends locally within the bay. Next slide. So we've conducted a couple of years of monitoring. So we're really just starting to get results, and please keep an eye out for some publications on that work. But a few of the things that many folks have talked about, we still need to better understand sort of the water mass and mixing impacts of Gulf influence versus Bay influence. We have 4 major rivers that are discharging into our watershed, some of which this is a phosphate region, and so there are definitely riverine influences that are affecting pH conditions within the bay that we need to tease out further. We know that there's high spatial variability, particularly in terms of the productivity of seagrass and what that might affect in terms of ocean acidification and pH conditions, so we need to evaluate that further. And then we're already beginning to launch a new set of research questions with other partners like the Mote Marine Laboratory to look at effects on calcifying organisms. Next slide. But really the important takeaway, I think, is that habitat restoration helps. These co-benefits that everyone's discussing are indeed very important. We know that the bay is important for our quality of life. We know that the seagrass provide climate adaptation and mitigation benefits, and also there are economic benefits that are associated with this kind of work. Next slide. So in fact, we've found that in doing the outreach for this project that it's ocean acidification is kind of a weedy topic when you really get into the chemistry, and it can be hard for people to grasp a hold of. But when our entry point is talking about seagrass recovery and restoration, which is really tangible and something that a lot of people here locally know about, it's something that makes them really get excited about the benefits of habitat restoration. And it's a great example of how they can see positive effects from their efforts and from the efforts of their local governments to have an impact on the climate change story, which oftentimes we know can be quite bleak. Next slide. And it's also gotten the attention of many of our local governments who've banded together in a resilience coalition. And so these folks are all working together on their adaptation action plans and assessing different ways that they can address climate change, both as individual local governments, but also collectively. And they're evaluating things like the blue carbon benefits of seagrass and our other coastal habitats, and are exploring things like voluntary carbon markets and how those can confer all of these various benefits and help them meet their climate related goals. Next slide. And finally, we know that all of these water quality improvements that we've had that we've worked towards here in Tampa Bay has important economic benefits. 1 in 5 jobs is dependent on a healthy bay here in Tampa Bay, and we're contributing $22 billion within our regional economy. And those things are really important. And having cleaned up the bay to this point, we're excited that we now have welcomed back a commercial oyster operation. Oyster leases really weren't occurring here in Tampa Bay because of water quality concerns, but we now have some commercial shellfish operators that are working in lower Tampa Bay, and that's great news. And like I said, we're also partnering. Stone crabs are really commercially an important recreational fishery here in the region, and so we're working to see how these pH variable habitats associated with seagrass areas are affecting stone crab reproduction, and whether or not, in fact, Tampa Bay is also serving as a refugia for stone crabs and these other sorts of calcifying organisms. Next slide. So with that, that's the fire hose of how we got into OA here in Tampa Bay. Thank you all for the opportunity to share a slice of our story with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Maya. I can't say enough how much I appreciate you joining us today. What a great presentation. And I will, let's see, we've got some references here, and I think a couple folks have asked whether or not slides can be distributed or not. And I think the answer is I will ask, and we'll get back to folks. And I want to be conscientious of folks' time here today. But that said, let's see, it's possible. We have a couple questions. I think we can, what I'm seeing in these chat boxes is a request generally for generally for the presentations, as well as maybe connecting with the speakers after. So I think we'll go ahead and make sure that is available to you all. The event was recorded, and we'll make sure that it gets to you as well in that way. The final thing, I just would be remiss if I didn't share, of course. I'll share my screen here one more time. Just a big thank you to all the presenters, and of course, put my information up here for anyone that wants to connect right away. But I hope that the takeaways here are that local actions to reduce these exacerbating stressors and increase resilience are possible, and really want to make sure that folks see that within an OA or an ocean climate framework, and that incorporating OA and other climate-related change as part of these existing policies and programs can really ensure more holistic assessment of both the vulnerability as well as a fuller picture of the strategies for mitigation and adaptation. So thank you guys for joining. That's my contact information, and I'd be remiss to say if anyone, local government body on the line is interested in joining the Alliance or learning more about what that process entails, please do reach out to me directly. And I look forward to connecting with you all in the future. So speakers, a huge thank you today. It was just an excellent set of presentations. And with that, I'll go ahead and conclude our workshop.